Hello and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, here today on Wednesday, halfway through the week already, January 8th, getting closer and closer to the start of the wild card rounds. A weekend full of football, honestly, with the college football playoffs getting started tomorrow already. So we're going to have a bunch of football to get to and a lot of topics on today's show to get to surrounding the NFL as well. Starting off with keeping track of all the coaching interviews and who's going where, who's talking with who. We're going to go through all of that in the first segment and just my thoughts on it, as well as giving a mini prediction on who I kind of want to see end up where. So that'll be something we talk about, as well as, speaking about coaching, the Dallas Cowboys denying the Chicago Bears' request to speak with Mike McCarthy. What was that about? Why is Jerry Jones, saying something and then saying the complete opposite thing? We're going to get to that as well, along with my final award predictions. Now that the regular season's over with, we're going to get to that, and the latest update on Jalen Hurts. So all of that is being brought to you on today's show. And before we get to any of those topics, I'd like to remind you guys, as I always do, if you guys have any questions, comments, or any opinions you'd like to share about anything really surrounding the NFL, please don't hesitate to do so. Your input and insight into anything is always welcome, and it always allows us to get a different perspective on something and maybe take the conversation in a different direction with your guys' help. So now, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and it gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that now, just by using the new Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat, and this way, your message is guaranteed to be featured on the show because I'll be able to see it, read it out loud, and get a gauge at what you guys are thinking of during any of these topics on today's show. So again, let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button. Let's keep this show as exciting and as interactive as possible. I always like hearing what you guys have to say. Just click the $ and get involved with the show. But with that now out of the way, like I mentioned, we're going to start off by talking about the coaching, carousel that we have going on, who's talking with who's getting interviewed where, all those sort of things. It's pretty interesting to kind of get an initial gauge at what's going on in terms of what direction these teams are going with, right? And the main ones are the Jets, the Bears, the Jaguars, and the Patriots. The Raiders haven't really requested interviews with anybody yet. They're still so new to the whole, playing field, right? Because they just fired Antonio Pierce. So we're not going to get to them yet, but really the Jets, the Bears, the Jaguars, the Saints is also the other one, and the New England Patriots are all already getting the process going, obviously. So yesterday was kind of like a step one to kind of know who has head coaching vacancies or just openings really on their roster. And now it's kind of step two, progressing through it and getting to know who is, interviewing at what spots. And starting off with the Jets, they have the most interviews lined up already, and they have already a couple of them done. They have said to be interviewing with 14 candidates for their head coaching position, definitely being thorough about it, right? Because this year really turned out the worst possible way. So the Jets are interviewing 14 possible candidates. Among them are the obvious ones like Aaron Glenn, Brian Flores, Mike Vrabel. They already interviewed Ron Rivera. Joe Brady's another one just within the division. Arthur Smith for the Pittsburgh Steelers is another one, and Bobby Slowick and all those guys as well. They already interviewed with Rex Ryan as well, but there are some surprising ones like Matt Nagy, like Josh McCown, former quarterback, former enough, recently enough that I remember when he was actually playing as a player. He's currently the Vikings quarterback coach as of right now, but he has gotten an interview with them for their head coaching position. Van Joseph is another one with the job he's done with the Denver Broncos. It was funny because we talked about it yesterday, how he should be getting some looks as well, and now it looks like the Jets are taking that step. And Brian Grease, the 49ers quarterback coach, is another one, as well as Darren Rizzi, the Saints interim head coach as of right now after they fired Dennis Allen, excuse me. He's getting a real opportunity here to try and be a head coach with the Jets. At least he's getting an interview. So those are basically all the coaches that the Jets are interviewing. And before I get into who I'd want, them to see higher, elsewhere we got the Chicago Bears. They're interviewing just as many people, about 13 head coaching candidates that they are scheduled to talk to. Some that are the same, like Aaron Glenn, Mike Vrabel, Brian Flores, and Arthur Smith. But where it's different from the New York Jets is the Bears are also set to interview with Pete Carroll. I believe that's going to be tomorrow. Ben Johnson is also another one. Thomas Brown, who's the interim head coach right now. Mike Kafka for the New York Giants. He is their offensive coordinator right now. He's gotten a head coaching interview with them. Drew Petzing, the offensive coordinator for the Cardinals, is also getting a shout here. Todd Monken, with the job he's done in Baltimore, he's got a head coaching interview with them as well. And Anthony Weaver, the Dolphins defensive coordinator, is also getting an opportunity to kind of at least get his name out there with this sort of interview. So that's great to see as well. Then elsewhere, we got the Jaguars with about half of the candidates that the Bears and Jets do. They're interviewing 8 guys, being Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson, Joe Brady, Todd Monken, Robert Saleh is a new one. They are interviewing the former Jets head coach, former 49ers defensive coordinator. He's getting another opportunity here. Kellen Moore is another one. I thought he'd be getting more looks, or at least being talked about a little bit more, but apparently not to the Bears or the Jets. But at least he has an opportunity here with the Jaguars. Then staying in Florida is Liam Cohen, currently the offensive coordinator for the Buccaneers. He's getting a head coaching interview with the Jaguars, and the way he has done his job, the way the Bucs look this year, especially on offense with Baker Mayfield, I think that's well-deserved. And Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator for the Raiders, is getting an opportunity here as well. Then the Saints, about the same amount of guys, the typical names other than, it's all basically the same. Their list is a little bit shorter. Aaron Glenn, Mike Vrabel, Joe Brady, Mike Kafka, Anthony Weaver, Kellen Moore. So they also have David Shaw. David Shaw is the Broncos senior personnel executive, and he's getting another opportunity here to potentially be the head coach of the Saints. They're giving him a chance to interview for the spot, so that's good to see. I don't really know too much about him, but at least he's getting the opportunity. Then the Patriots are keeping it very close. The Patriots don't really have a wide range of guys that maybe could be their head coach, so you get a better understanding of who it could be. Mike Vrabel, Ben Johnson, Byron Leftwich is a new one, the former Buccaneers offensive coordinator, back when they won the Super Bowl with Tom Brady still there. And Pep Hamilton, the former Chargers and Houston quarterback coach. Currently, he's getting an opportunity with the Patriots as of right now. So we rattled off a lot of names, a lot of the similar ones, because I think in a way they're the most deserving of it, you could say. So with that out of the way now, there's a lot of names to get to, but who is going to end up who, right? I think for the time being, based on all the information that we have, looking at all these teams and, how some of them have a wider range of potential candidates, I think for the most part, I have my eye on a couple ones that I think would be ideal fits. Starting off with the Patriots, we sort of talked about it before with Gerard Mayo being fired and there being a lot of attention on Mike Vrabel. I think this one makes too much sense not to happen. I know Mike Vrabel would probably get a lot of these jobs. He's very qualified to be the head coach anywhere, but I think the familiarity there in New England, Robert Kraft, the former player there, I think that one is just like screaming that it's just like a perfect match there for Vrabel to kind of bring them back to what they want to be, obviously in their glory days, the franchise sort of days, where the dynasty sort of days, I should have said. who better to do it than a guy that actually played there? So that one seems too obvious not to happen. Another obvious one, I think, is Aaron Glenn. Aaron Glenn was a former defensive back in the NFL, and he was actually a defensive backs coach there with the New Orleans Saints, and he seems pretty well revered there. I heard Drew Brees talk about him and how he views him as the ideal candidate. I'm pretty sure he's already had an interview there as well. So, he was coaching there before Dan Campbell brought him over to Detroit, So with that connection back to New Orleans, and I feel like when you have a connection like that, it always serves you a little bit better to be given a little bit more time when maybe things aren't going to go well the first year, to know, and you have that trust and connection, that prior relationship with the organization. I think that would bode well for him. So Aaron Glenn, I can see him landing with the Saints. And for the Jaguars, another one that didn't really have too many candidates thus far, I could see them going with someone like, I kind of like Joe Brady there. I need somebody that's very offensive minded with them, because obviously they have Trevor Lawrence and the talent on offense. Brian Thomas Jr. looks fantastic. So I really like Joe Brady. I like the job he's done with the Buffalo Bills, and really Josh Allen. I'm surprised no one's really talking about him more, right, as much as like Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn or things like that. So I would love to see Joe Brady there and really take on that challenge in Jacksonville, where you're in a division that's really not like a powerhouse really outside of the Texans, and they're not completely overtaking everybody. So he has an opportunity there to really take over as much of that division and really be close to the Houston Texans, because the Colts aren't really looking great right now. The Titans are still trying to reset everything. So I think that would be a great opportunity for everybody. They have a bunch of cap space. They have a new stadium being built and everything like that. It could be the beginning of something really, really exciting. So I think Joe Brady would be a great candidate there. And for the Chicago Bears, I think Ben Johnson makes a lot of sense to take on that challenge, have a rookie quarterback from this year, and really make him your franchise guy. I think that's something that Ben Johnson would really excel with. The kind of playmakers they have, the defense that they already have is really good, and really they just got to do the dirty work, right? The offensive linemen get a little bit more help on the defensive line as well. But outside of that, it's hard to really say that you need much else, right? They got everything else, like the flashy pieces, the wide receiver, the running back, the quarterback, obviously. But now they need a new head coach, a guy that's better equipped, I guess you could say, to handle a rookie quarterback like Caleb Williams. And you still need that offensive line, which is going to be massive. But I think Ben Johnson would really excel at that. I heard Caleb Williams talk about it, and how, in his words, I'm pretty sure he said he was fascinated and really interested with how Ben Johnson called that game against the Vikings. So I would like to see Ben Johnson end up there. He's familiar with it in the division as well. I think that would be a good fit. And then for the Jets, just off the top of my head, out of all these names, right, Rex Ryan really wants to be the coach there, but at the beginning of this, I wasn't really pushing for Rex Ryan. So I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being Rex, because everywhere you look, it's always a quote about him wanting to be the head coach again. But I don't know, maybe someone like Brian Flores. I think Brian Flores could do very well there. He's already been in that division, obviously, with the Patriots and being the head coach of the Dolphins, and he didn't do that bad. I know there were some question marks about the relationship with him and Tua Tagovailoa, but it did produce something. He was pretty successful there, had a good defense, and the Jets have a good defense as well. So at least you would hope to get that. And on the offensive side of the ball, there's a lot to be done, obviously. How do you use Breece Hall? How do you get the best out of Garrett Wilson? Is that offensive line finished, or you still need to add a lot to it? I think bringing in a guy like Brian Flores could be exciting for them. And I don't know. I mean, they have a lot of guys to get through, so we'll see. But I mean, Brian Flores or like Ron Rivera wouldn't surprise me either. Pete Carroll could be one, but he's not even on their list of potential interviews. So I think really Brian Flores is the one that sits the best with me thus far. But we're still in the early stages, so for the time being, we're just going to leave it at that, and we're going to move on to another segment we have coming up after the break. speaking about head coaches, one head coach that wasn't given the opportunity elsewhere was Mike McCarthy because the Cowboys wouldn't allow it. We're going to talk more about that, why that happened, a potential explanation for it, and what the future holds for the Cowboys and Mike McCarthy. We'll discuss that when we return after this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. Some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
All right. So we're back here on the show, and we're not going to move too far away from the head coach talk because we just finished talking about all the potential openings and which candidates are talking with what teams. But Mike McCarthy, the current head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, is and could be one of the top candidates potentially for the Dallas, or really for anybody. For the Cowboys, obviously, because he's still there. But I think a good amount of people would want to talk to Mike McCarthy about potentially being their head coach. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but before we get into that, we've talked a lot about the coaching situation in Dallas just in general, right? And how at the beginning of the season, when we talked in the preseason, and even like all the way back to like last April, right? When we talked about the draft and, what this whole situation could look like, we described it as a lame duck situation because Dallas let this run all the way up until now. They let this run until really the absolute last minute because Mike McCarthy is still on the last year of his deal, and much like they did with CeeDee Lamb, much like they did with Dak Prescott, and probably how they're going to handle Micah Parsons' deal, they like to push everything to the absolute last second. And because of the actions, or really lack of actions, from the Cowboys to try and re-sign Mike McCarthy, the Chicago Bears are currently in the spot where they're actively looking for their new leader, their new head coach, right? And they looked at Mike McCarthy and they saw some potential there, probably, right? They asked for an interview with him like they did to 13 other guys, right? And because of that, that you're asking permission, so you obviously have to get it granted before you move on with anything else. But the Dallas Cowboys denied that permission. They denied that request. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think anybody else really had to deal with that. So this is a first that I'm hearing about it. I knew it was possible, but everybody else hasn't really had a problem with it. Or at least for the ones that are still playing, they might be holding off until the end of the postseason or when they get eliminated or something like that. That's really no issue. But the Cowboys simply just said, no, you're not going to interview with him, at least until this point while he's currently under contract. And while Mike McCarthy's contract, on that note, actually expires today, this is the last day he's technically there under contract, Dallas still holds an exclusive negotiating right through January 14th. So that's next Tuesday. So really, the Cowboys, his contract ends today on a, technicality, kind of like that, but it's really until next Tuesday where he officially becomes a free agent and he's free to talk to whoever is willing to talk to him about a potential head coaching spot somewhere. But the issue, obviously, right now is the Cowboys denying Mike McCarthy the opportunity to find himself a new job when when the problem is it looks unfair and it looks contradicting and hypocritical now because the Cowboys had the opportunity, if they really wanted to re-sign him, they had the opportunity to do that all year. And that's where the problem is, right? If they really wanted to keep him, you don't wait until the last day to kind of make it seem like it's a panic sort of move, right? Like, you start thinking of other hypotheticals right after this, right? Like, if Dallas and the Cowboys don't really want to move in a different direction now, all of a sudden, off of Mike McCarthy, you start to think why, and you get to a spot where you maybe think, like, maybe nobody else wants to come coach here, or maybe they don't have a lot of guys lined up, and they don't want to go down that avenue because, they have something pretty well with Mike McCarthy, as much as some people or like fans might want to criticize him, as well as myself, right? It's been a pretty steady thing going there in Dallas. So you might be fearful of the idea that the grass might not be greener on the other side, right? If that makes sense. So with that being the case, that could be a reason why I could see the Cowboys, holding off on it right now. But it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good because of, like I mentioned, the fact that you had the opportunity to do this all year. So now you're kind of shuffling between two different things, right? Different ends of the spectrum. Either you want to keep him and you should have re-signed him already, or you had him in a lame duck situation, but you didn't want to just move off of him all of a sudden, so you kept him up until this point, and now you're at a point where you're thinking, all right, let's go our separate ways, right? If you're not going to extend him or re-sign him, let's just go our separate ways. There's no need to be doing this. Yeah, we have no problem with him speaking to everybody else, but then your actions show something completely different. It looks like you do have a problem with him speaking to other teams, right? Because you're not going to grant at least the Chicago Bears the permission to talk to him about a potential new opportunity. And that brings us to what Jerry Jones said about this. I kind of alluded to it, where he said that he would allow teams to speak to Mike McCarthy because he wouldn't want anybody coaching there who didn't want to be there, right? And he related it to Ezekiel Elliott, right? Because for anybody that wasn't aware, Zeke was on the Cowboys, right? Obviously, but they released him during the last week of the regular season in order for any playoff team to potentially sign him and, give him that opportunity to not just be stuck on the Cowboys where he wasn't really playing anyway, so his season was going to be over. The Cowboys did him a solid, and they released him, and now he's with the Los Angeles Chargers, right? Continuing to play football and, being any sort of help for the Chargers if they need it, right? So that was something that Jerry Jones alluded and kind of connected back to Mike McCarthy, right? He'd be willing to kind of do him that solid, right? If he really wanted to leave, or at least just don't negate him of the opportunity, right? Basically for Mike McCarthy. And it sounded nice, but he didn't allow Chicago the permission. So as much as he talked about it, his actions showed a completely different thing, which it's not really surprising because, I don't know, I guess we've been kind of down this road before with the Cowboys where, you're talking about being all in, you're talking about wanting to keep Dak, and they ended up keeping Dak, I guess, but it's always, they say something, they almost don't follow up with it, or they take too long to do it, and they just keep talking and talking about it until, something eventually happens, right? When we're tired of talking about it and we're just left wondering when this is going to get done. So, the reports say that Jerry Jones and Mike McCarthy are set to meet this week about the future of the Dallas Cowboys and really where this organization is heading, or where they want to go to, right? They're going to have a meeting this week about that. And maybe the only other alternative I can think of as to why Jerry Jones would say something and then do the complete opposite of it would be because he wants to talk to him first and come to a decision before he kind of has Chicago in the back of his head already, right? If he already did that interview and then he's talking to Jerry Jones, he could have, a foot out the door already. So that discussion, their little meeting, isn't going to be as significant if he didn't meet with anybody else, right? So that's something I can see why the Cowboys and Jerry Jones wouldn't allow him to meet with anybody yet. But I don't know. I feel like, in my opinion, I feel like Mike McCarthy and the Cowboys, I think, has run its course. And I don't know. I just feel like there comes a point where you can only just keep running it back so much before you're not really seeing anything. You're not really seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and things like that. I just feel like they've had their chance together as a partnership, right, with Mike McCarthy and the Cowboys, and clearly they haven't gotten to where they've wanted to end up. And being in a market in Dallas and things like that, all the pressure, the media attention, and everything like that, I just feel like they would benefit from bringing in a new voice, not running it completely back with Jerry, Mike, Dak, Micah Parsons, and CeeDee Lamb. Obviously, great players. They're all fantastic, but it's a lot of the same things. It's legitimately running it back with the exact same crew, exact same core. And I know you're not going to move off of Dak. You're not going to move off of Micah. And CeeDee Lamb's already locked in. But I think they need a new voice in there. I think they need a new voice to kind of get some different results out of this group. If it does happen to be Mike McCarthy again, I don't really see that changing all that much. And the Cowboys need to see some sort of improvement. They already saw a lot of regression this year because of the injuries and the run defense and everything like that. I need to see them move in the other direction now. I need to see them get a little bit better than just the first round of the playoffs, right? So I think they would benefit from bringing in someone that's not Mike McCarthy. Not that he's done a horrible job and he's the one to blame for all of it, but I think it's just run its course, quite honestly. Chicago would be a good opportunity if, for whatever reason, they think Mike McCarthy is their guy. But like I said before, I think Ben Johnson would be the ideal guy for me. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if it's not Chicago, I feel like Mike McCarthy would get opportunity elsewhere, like the Raiders or something like that. Maybe even like as an offensive coordinator, if he wanted to do that. But I think this situation with Dallas, we're probably going to know a lot more after this week because of that meeting, like I said. But yeah, it's weird that they said that they would give him that opportunity, and for them to deny it, it's like, all right, well then what do you want to do, right? It's a lot more confusion around the Cowboys that we're only going to really know more until they're ready to tell us more. So we'll wait until that point, but that was a pretty interesting story that I thought I would discuss on here. But off of that, we're going to move a little bit more of our focus to the playoffs. And one of the most interesting games is going to be between the Eagles and the Green Bay Packers. But the Eagles have a huge question mark at quarterback because Jalen Hurts is still in the concussion protocol. It's getting to a point where we could be worried about it, should be worried about it. Should we be worried about it? I think that's something that could become a lot more serious over the course of tomorrow and even into Friday. So we're going to discuss that, all the latest news on him, and what it could mean for the Eagles and their playoff chances if they don't have Jalen Hurts out there. So we'll be right back with that. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We're back here on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about one of the wild card matchups that we have coming up this upcoming weekend. Not really so much of a preview, but just really focusing in on the Eagles and their quarterback, Jalen Hurts, because Green Bay and Philadelphia will see each other again for a second time this year after their Week 1 game. If you guys remember, down in Brazil, and apart from all the the extra stuff outside of football, going to a new country and things like that, and bringing the NFL to South America, the game put on a very good performance. It was 34-29 in favor of the Eagles, and now with their rematch coming up on Sunday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Today being Wednesday, the biggest factor and one of the biggest pieces of news in all, of the wild card, honestly, has been around Jalen Hurts and his health and any of the latest updates. We can't get enough of these latest updates on Jalen Hurts because he's been in the concussion protocol all this time. Going back to Week 16 against Washington, where that was a big game for the Commanders and obviously for the Eagles too, to kind of help them move in a direction where they could have won the division that week. But it all started off pretty cloudy for them because Jalen Hurts only played about, I don't even know, maybe like 4 minutes or something like that. He didn't finish the first quarter because he was dealing with that head injury, and he didn't come back in that game, and the Commanders ended up winning it. But really from that point on, he did not return to that game. He wasn't able to play in Week 17 against Dallas, which, I mean, they really didn't need him, obviously, because they ended up winning by a lot. I mean, it was a blowout. So really, there was no problem there. Then you go to Week 18, and he still was not cleared to play. But again, a meaningless game because they were already locked into the number 2 seed, so he probably wasn't going to play anyway. But although he might have missed those games against lesser opponents where you might not have needed him as much as weeks before that, obviously, or even in the playoffs, right, leading up to it, the issue is not that he missed those games as much as it was that he wasn't cleared yet, that he had not cleared the concussion protocol yet, and those are two different things, right? Because if you're not playing, it could be for a couple reasons, right? You're not feeling great, obviously, injury related, like Jalen Hurts is, or you're being sat, because you have the opportunity, you've already locked up everything, so you just don't have to play. And the coach decides to sit you, like he did with Saquon, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, all those guys. So those are a couple reasons why you missed the game. But it is different from the fact that if you were able to play, if you were in a must-win game or something like that, even still, Jalen wouldn't have been able to play because he's not cleared yet medically. And he's still... This was news to me because I didn't know really the process of the concussion protocol, because according to these reports on the concussion protocol and what it entails, it's a 5-step process to kind of receive full clearance in order for you to just return to football activities like practice and things like that, full on practice. The 5 steps in the concussion protocol are: first, you got to go through some symptom-limited activity right at the start. Then from that point, you move up to aerobic exercises, moving it up a little bit more. Then from that point on, you kind of get it together, put those two together, and you move up to football-specific exercises. Then you go up to club-based non-contact training drills. And then the last step in the concussion protocol is full football activity and receiving that medical clearance at the end of it all. If you're able to pass through all 5 of those steps, then you should be good to go in returning in full football activity, right? Obviously. But Nick Sirianni said back on Monday that Jalen Hurts still remained in that concussion protocol, and yesterday he wasn't a participant in practice whatsoever. So things were starting to get a little bit tight when it came to this situation with the Eagles and Jalen Hurts, because yes, he's gotten a lot of rest, right? That's obviously great. He's probably feeling great physically, but I mean, you need to obviously practice, right? Heading into the wild card round. This is the start of everything. You obviously have Super Bowl aspirations, so now that it is Wednesday, it gets a little bit concerning when your starting quarterback isn't out there going through, I mean, he's going through the game plan, right, mentally and everything like that, but it's not the same as repping it out, going through it on the football field, and, actually seeing it and going through the motions and whatnot, right? He previously participated in a walkthrough on Saturday, but that's still a non-contact, activity. So it really didn't show any progression, and the Eagles haven't been too talkative about, giving day-to-day updates on Jalen Hurts. So I went to the injury report, obviously, for the Packers and Eagles going into this game, and there wasn't too much info given on Jalen Hurts and where he stood so far, but one of the reports that I read on, the situation and some of the reports that were following this whole scenario pretty closely, right, was that one of them said that if Jalen Hurts didn't record a limited participation in either tomorrow's practice or even today, it would have started to become very difficult for him to clear the concussion protocol in time for him to play on Sunday. But that's where we get to the injury report, obviously, today. And I'm looking at it now, and under Wednesday, apparently Jalen Hurts was a limited participant today. So that's obviously a great sign, because the kind of threshold, the timeline was kind of set up for tomorrow, for him to be a limited participant tomorrow. So if he's already doing that today, and hopefully tomorrow he gets to be limited again, or maybe he gets increased to full participant, that would be fantastic news, right? Because then there would be no problem with him missing the game. But the worst case scenario would be if he didn't practice tomorrow, or it would stay kind of the same if he was limited again tomorrow, and then it would really come down to Friday and maybe a little bit of Saturday, but then you're really cutting it close with fully clearing the concussion protocol, right? Because this isn't something that you could just kind of play through, because the protocol is the protocol, right? It's there, and there's no exceptions, there's no playing through anything. It's not like a hamstring injury where it still hurts, it's still pretty, it's still pretty injured, but you can go out there and kind of give it your best try at it, right? There's none of that, right, with a concussion. So it's trending in a better direction than what I thought it would be. This is my first time looking at the injury report, so I thought he wasn't going to practice today, but at least it looks like it's heading in a possible scenario where Jalen Hurts is going to be out there. So that's obviously great, because, there's a whole bunch of aspirations and expectations on the Philadelphia Eagles, right? Because where they are right now, the number 2 seed, yes, they're going to have a lot of advantage. Yes, they're going to be at home against the Packers team that's pretty injured as well to their own right. Jordan Love is dealing with an elbow injury. Christian Watson is out for the remainder of the year. So they're dealing with their own problems, right? But it looks like Jordan Love is going to play. But for you to not have your quarterback, even as we got little glimpses of it, leading up to it against the Commanders, against even the Giants a little bit, and even the Dallas Cowboys, it looks all right because they have a ton of talent in AJ, Devontae Smith, and Saquon Barkley, obviously, right? It's not like it brings your chances from a solid 8 or a 9 all the way down to a 2, right? It's going to be somewhere in the middle there, probably like at a 5 or even as high as a 7, quite honestly. But it's still like, if he's not out there, then the idea that the Eagles are going to go in as favorites, if you're looking at that line, like a spread or something like that, that thing's going to really be tugging the line in favor of the Eagles. And then if Jalen Hurts gets ruled out, you're going to see that thing go the complete opposite direction and at least be a pick'em or in favor of the Packers. Because I think that's how important Jalen is, right? It really doesn't show. They've looked okay against the Giants, the Commanders a little bit, and the Dallas Cowboys, but we're talking about the playoffs now, right? We're talking about there is no next week. There is no, we're going to get better, right? This is it. This is the final test of it all, and you're really embarking on this journey, and you don't want to be left behind at the first stop, right? And if that ever were to happen and Jalen wasn't out there playing, one, it would be obviously very concerning. I would still give him a decent chance at it, but then you're talking about maybe the Packers upsetting them in Philadelphia. And then at that point, not that I would want to see it going in a way where a lot of the blame goes on Nick Sirianni, because you can't control the concussion and the injuries and something like that, right? Obviously, right? But it would be hard to kind of pan away from looking at Sirianni, because in a season like this where you pick the worst possible time for your quarterback to be injured like this, it's not really on the coach. It's not really on anybody. But still, you're going to find yourself in a spot where people are going to be looking at him. They're going to be looking at this season as a failure with Saquon and all the talent that they have. If they get somehow eliminated because Jalen's not out there, it's going to look very bad. It's going to be a very bad day in Philadelphia for, Nick Sirianni, I think especially. And if that were to happen, I'm not saying he would get fired or anything like that, because it's pretty unfair. I would say, because your quarterback's hurt, so you can't really just force him out there. But, Philadelphia is a tough spot. It's a brutal place. And for that to be a possible reality, again, if Jalen Hurts isn't out there, I'd be very interested to see how they attack that problem, right, with Howie Roseman or, anybody in that front office come out and say that they're not going to change anything, or are they going to make a quick move and maybe move on from Nick Sirianni? I think that would be pretty harsh. And I've been critical of Sirianni, but it's a weird gray area where you're missing a guy and he's in the concussion protocol still, and you really can't do much about it except just hope that he comes back in time. And it's a huge determinant, obviously, for people that criticize Jalen and maybe don't look at him as a polished passer or a top passer in these playoffs, but he fits exactly what they want to be. His running ability, obviously the tush push and everything like that, he's perfect for them. And I think we haven't really seen it because they played against the Cowboys, Giants so far, how much they'll miss them in a playoff environment. But that's still a long ways away. That's still a big hypothetical, obviously, but we'll see where it goes. Tomorrow's going to be a huge day for Jalen if he's a limited participant again, or maybe he gets bumped up to full time in being able to practice. So we'll keep an eye on that for tomorrow, and I'll probably mention it briefly during the show tomorrow. But for right now, we got a couple more segments to get to. One of them is my full final predictions for the NFL Honors Awards, the Defensive Player of the Year, the Coach of the Year, Rookie Awards, obviously, and the coveted MVP Award. I'm going to give my final predictions when we return after this break. Jumping back into the show and into our next segment here, we're talking about awards. We're talking about who is in my final picks for these awards, the predictions that I have after now knowing everything about the regular season. We've gone through the entire thing and through different discussions on really the MVP, because that dominates the award talk, right, all year long. But there's been a lot of tight competition, really in a lot of spots where the Offensive Player of the Year was tight, the comeback, or not the Comeback Player of the Year, the Offensive Rookie of the Year really took an exciting turn, at some point this season. And there's been a lot of great performances, right? Statistically, and some of the guys that go unnoticed also to be included in these discussions has made these picks pretty difficult for a lot of these spots. But I've got, how many do I got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. I got 7 awards here. And there's other ones that were, I guess not as talked about, like Special Teams Player of the Year, Most Underrated Player of the Year, Catch of the Year, something like that. I didn't include those in here just for time purposes, so I just stuck to the main ones, obviously. These 7 awards, I went through and I predicted my winners, and I also gave a runner-up because, like I said, it was pretty close this year because of a lot of great performances individually and as a team. So, without further ado, talking about our first award here, we got the Defensive Player of the Year that I thought should go to the Broncos cornerback, Pat Surtain. Pat Surtain, I have him as my Defensive Player of the Year. I thought that Trey Hendrickson made a really good case to be the Defensive Player of the Year, but in the end, I went with Pat. Because their defense, he's one of the guys that, like I just briefly said, he's one of the guys that kind of goes unnoticed, right? Unless, for whatever reason, quarterbacks are throwing to him a lot, and they probably shouldn't. That's really the only time you see him on your screen, or maybe making a tackle or something like that in a running play. But for the majority of the time this season, nobody's really looking at his side of the field and trying to throw it there consecutively, because they understand that it wouldn't really go well for them if they decided to go towards Pat Surtain. And the pass rush is and has been a huge part of the Broncos defense so far this year and how dominant they look. But as much as the pass rush has helped the coverage in a lot of instances, the coverage from Pat Surtain and really the entire secondary has also helped out that pass rush a lot, because, if you get a pass rush there quickly, it obviously makes it look like the corners are really covering very well, because the quarterback can't get the ball out in time because he has somebody in his face. But for other times where a quarterback's just sitting back there and he's got a pretty clean pocket, if the secondary's doing its job, you have the quarterback dancing around back there and not really having a place to throw it, then it makes the pass rush, it helps them out a lot more. So I thought that's a great example to use here with Pat, and how he pretty much closes off a whole side of the field. So now you not only help out your pass rush, but you're really limiting them to a certain part of the field. And those guys over there are really good as well, with Riley Moss and McMillan and those guys. So they've done a very good job of that. And in terms of numbers, Pat Surtain's been thrown at this year only about 10 or 11% of his snaps, and that's the second lowest among defensive backs in the NFL this year, with at least 250 snaps recorded. And in man coverage, he's been in that about 41% of the time. And he's recorded 4 interceptions. One was a huge pick six in one of their games, I believe against the Raiders. And really, you go all year. He's gone all year with no missed tackles. And it might not seem like a huge thing, but for corners, that's usually one of their weak points. And Pat not only brings the coverage, but clearly is willing to get in there and tackle. So that's a huge thing. And his work just goes unnoticed, I think. So I like that about this award, and kind of rewarding someone like Pat Surtain in that regard. So to me, he was my Defensive Player of the Year for the regular season this year. Then, looking to our next award, we got the Offensive Player of the Year, and it obviously had to go to Saquon, but you look at other guys Joe had a fantastic year. Joe had an unreal year. Derrick Henry obviously had a pretty monster year, but he's done it a couple times where he's put up ridiculous numbers, so it might not be that impressive. And then you obviously have Jamar Chase. He literally won the Triple Crown. So that's, in terms of history, only 5 other guys have done something like that. And he, along with Joe, were huge parts as to why we even talked about the Bengals, right? If one or both of them weren't on that team, they would be down there with like the Pats and the Titans, I believe, right, with how bad they played everywhere else. Really, it was a lot of Jamar and Joe Burrow. But Saquon, I mean, to be that close to the Eric Dickerson record and the rushing record, I think it trumps Jamar Chase's Triple Crown. Because, I mean, we're talking about 5 other guys with Jamar, and we're only talking about 1 other guy with Eric Dickerson there in the rushing record. So I thought that kind of trumped the Triple Crown there at least a little bit. And, I mean, just looking at it in terms of value, what he added to the Eagles, they were already talented. They were already had some of the best players in each position around the NFL. But then to add a guy like Saquon, a lot of the times this year it's looked very unfair. It's looked like there was no way anybody could really try and stop any part of this team, right? If you try and stop Saquon, he was still going to do his thing. And then if you're trying so hard to stop him, then A.J. Brown's going off, Devontae Smith going off. And if you try and focus on them, then Saquon, just destroys you with breaking off like a 50 or 70-yard run and just ending the game just like that. Consecutively, he put up big numbers as well. And I think the ability that he has on his own, along with that offensive line that they have in Philadelphia, constantly just made Saquon a threat, right? You couldn't doze off for a play or two because, like I said, he could just break one off, and then everything's out the window. So I think that big playability, the constant threat of him, and how much he's added to an Eagles team that was already very good to bring them to an even better level that we've seen so far this year, I thought that was enough for me. So I gave it to Saquon. I'm still mad he didn't break the rushing record, that the Eagles didn't let him do that, but he'll get this award, and I think he's very deserving of it. Then after the Offensive Player of the Year, we got the Coach of the Year that I believe is going to be Kevin O'Connell. There's been a lot said about Dan Campbell, and I think he's a great coach as well. I think Jim Harbaugh would be my number 2, though, for really the main reason that is all these teams are good, and I think the Vikings and the Lions are obviously better than the Chargers in terms of who they have at their disposal, but to me, that's one part of the puzzle, right? That's only one aspect of it, right? Then you get into another area where, all right, you kind of eliminate the Chargers out of this, right? And I think it really came down to Dan Campbell and Kevin O'Connell for a lot of people. And you look at talented rosters everywhere. You look at the play calling individually is great for both of them. But to me, where I find the difference in both of them is, like, Kevin O'Connell, obviously a great head coach, and obviously has Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and all those guys at his disposal. But when you look at a guy like him and what, his situation is in Minnesota, to bring them to a 14-win record and be that close to winning the entire, division and conference, I think is a huge accomplishment. But also the fact that you did it with Sam Darnold, a guy that nobody ever predicted that he was going to be in the situation. Once it became official that Sam was going to be, the quarterback, nobody was thinking 14-win season. And that has a lot to do with Kevin O'Connell. And, I mean, compared to the Lions, right, you had Aaron Glenn, you had Ben Johnson, not to take away from the job that Dan Campbell does, because I think it's a lot. But Kevin, there's nobody going after the offensive coordinator for the Vikings. The defensive coordinator for the Vikings, Brian Flores is one, but you didn't have it on both sides like Dan Campbell did. And I think the job he's done with him, this offense, and getting to a 14-win season, where last year they were pretty good, right, with Kirk Cousins. Unfortunately, he got hurt, but they were still showing signs that they were going to be very good. But then this year, to get that much better with a quarterback that really wasn't penciled in, to be the starter one, and to kind of have the season that he's had, making a Pro Bowl, I think a lot of that has to go to Kevin O'Connell. So I thought that was a more impressive feat than, say, Dan Campbell or Jim Harbaugh. So I went with Kevin O'Connell for my Coach of the Year. Then the next award was pretty obvious. Comeback Player of the Year, I went with Joe. Not much to say about Joe. He could be in that conversation with MVP, right? That conversation's been brought up a lot. But the team record is obviously not helping his case. So last year he went down with that wrist injury, and now coming back this year and having the best season of his career makes it so much more hurtful that he's not in the playoffs. But, I mean, it is what it is now. And, I had J.K. Dobbins in here as my second, as my runner-up. But Joe really ran away with this award towards the latter portion of the season where they had to go out there and win. And every game it looked like he was throwing for like 300 and 3 touchdowns. Jamar Chase benefited off of it as well. So I think Joe is very deserving of this. He's in the conversation for Offensive Player of the Year as well. But with that going to Saquon, I felt like this award had to go to Joe because he definitely deserves one this year. Then we move on to the Rookie Awards. For the Defensive Rookie of the Year, I had Chop Robinson. I had Jared Verse at some point this year. I want to say through the midway point of the season, I had Jared Verse. But after a while, he kind of dozed off a little bit. He wasn't really making as much plays as he did in the first half of the season. So I kind of went with Chop Robinson because, I looked into some other articles and some other reports and sources on, what this competition was looking like. And I wasn't aware that after about a month into the season, all the way until the end of it, he had a 15.5 pressure rate since the end of October up until now. And that was only second to Myles Garrett. And only because he had 6 sacks this year, it's not really so eye-popping. But other defensive rookies compared to him and don't really stand out too much. This one was an award that it could go to a couple guys. I wanted to give it to maybe someone like Jarian Cooper for the Packers, but he didn't really have too much to back it up like Chop Robinson. So the fact that there was no Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips also were out this year, we got to see a lot of him. And because of that, because of some of the stats, I decided to give him the award, with Jared Verse coming in second for me. Then the second to last award here I have is Offensive Rookie of the Year. It made it close a little bit with Brock Bowers and Bo Nix, obviously, but I think Jaden has done it really the entire course of the season, and really after the first couple weeks, really in that first game against the Bengals, and then from that point on, the run that they went on with him and how accurate he was and how really he looked so polished and ready for this moment, I had to give the award to Jaden Daniels. I had Brock Bowers coming in second, but again, the overall team success of it all, Jaden Daniels is in the playoffs and has a good opportunity to move on with his first-round matchup. So he made the Pro Bowl. He's already probably considered one of the best quarterbacks in the NFC, and it all culminates with the year that he had as a rookie. So I thought giving this award to him was adequately appropriate. So now we get to the last award, right? The MVP, Lamar or Josh Allen, right? That's the question. I'm going to stick with Josh. I'm pretty sure I had Josh all year. I know I had him in the mid-season portion of this, but really to me it just comes down to the fact that I don't like saying that the recency bias is... Obviously, it's an actual thing that happens with voters, right? Lamar's won 2 already. The recency bias and the fact that are we going to give Lamar a third one, right, when Josh Allen's had a good season as well? Because I don't like to diminish what Josh Allen has meant to the Bills this season and what kind of job he's done as well. But I think a point that's really significant in this argument is the fact that, the Bills were really not supposed to be this good. I don't think many had them as the number 2 seed. Maybe a couple people out there had them winning their division, right? But nobody really had them performing the way they did. And he was really at the center of it all. In a year where, Stephon Diggs leaves, and now we're really going to know what this offense was made of. Was it really about Josh, or was it really so much dependent on Stephon Diggs? And Josh Allen has blown those expectations out of the water. The numbers also speak for themselves, and I think also, obviously Lamar can't control how people view this, but having Derrick Henry be added to your team already, in a season where you won the MVP and then you bring on Derrick Henry, we took away a player like that from Josh Allen, right? They took away Stephon Diggs, and still he put this offense on his back, and they were really flourishing under him. So to me, I think that's very significant in that regard, and I think Josh Allen has done more than enough to win the MVP this year. It could have gone to a lot of people, right? If Joe was in the playoffs, I might go to Joe Burrow, but I think Josh, to me, has definitely played at a different level this year. For a long time, he wasn't turning the ball over really at all, and I think that's another example of the growth that he's shown this year. So I went with that. I went with Josh Allen. It's going to be very close regardless, but I think he's done enough to kind of win over the majority of the votes going into a week or two before the Super Bowl when we're going to officially know who's won what award. But for us on this show, we're going to go to a quick break here, and when we return, we have one more segment to get to, talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers and how they're stumbling into the playoffs. Are they the worst team in this year's playoffs, and are they going to go into another one-and-done scenario like they did and have been doing over the last previous seasons? We're going to answer that when we return in just a few seconds.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And thank you guys for joining me on the last segment of today's show, going over to a team that we haven't really talked about too much, at least in regards to last weekend, because I tried to forget about it. But the Steelers season, I thought, after what I saw on, Saturday, I thought the Steelers season peaked on December 8th. On December 8th, when they had just beat the Cleveland Browns to go to 10-3, leading the AFC North, playing as good as I ever would have thought they would be playing this season, with Russell Wilson and the offense looking comparable, very capable of putting up like 24, 25, 30 points in some of these games. Now, knowing what I know now, it looks like that was the peak of it all, and now we're very much in the decline. We're very much free-falling still heading into these playoffs. The Steelers they couldn't have imagined a worse scenario to be heading into the playoffs than where they currently find themselves at this point. You couldn't tell me that they wouldn't win. You couldn't tell me at that point on December 8th that they wouldn't win this division or at least be anywhere lower than the 5th seed. I couldn't imagine such a collapse from them over the last couple weeks here, but as of today, where we stand right now, a month later, I might add, a month later here on January 8th, after December 8th, a month later, and how the Steelers have gone from, there was all the conversation about the Steelers being a legit contender, being in a spot where they could compete with anybody in the AFC with how they were playing, to now being considered one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the playoffs, is insane. The Steelers being 3 days away from playing Baltimore again also, after losing their last 4 games, to me, really couldn't get worse. Because to me, all that says is they're struggling right now, and now they're going to get beat up by, their arch rival, their sibling in a sense, right? In a sort of analogy, right? They're going to culminate this entire season. The icing on the cake is going to be Baltimore beating them at home once again and just kicking them out of the playoffs, right? That is something that I think a lot of people are legitimately considering is going to happen on Saturday. Everywhere I look, everyone's picking the Ravens, and rightly so. I think right now they're like 9.5 or 10.5 favorites at home against the Steelers. That's even still without Zay Flowers. It doesn't look like Zay Flowers is going to play in this game. It looks like with that knee injury, at least it's going to keep him out of the wild card round. So even still with that, the Ravens are heavy favorites going into this game, and it all really got to a low point this past Saturday in their 19-17 loss to the Cincinnati Bengals, where that was Pittsburgh's fourth straight game where they lost, and they failed to exceed 17 points. Again, in just last month, right before that December 8th game, where they were scoring, like, they had scored like 40-something against the Bengals. They just finished scoring 27 against the Browns. They put up 20-something against the Commanders and won on the road. It was looking pretty decent, right? They already beat the Ravens once this year, I should say. And now to be in this situation, right, where you're struggling to put up 17 points is not even close to all of the problems that this team has as of right now. Going back to that Saturday day game before we kind of expand it out a little bit more, in that game where Cincinnati, obviously you knew needed to win, and they had a fantastic offense. They have a fantastic offense, right, with T. Higgins, Joe Burrow, and Jamar Chase, right? Not a lot of teams can say they held the Bengals to 19 points. Almost nobody did. The only team that kind of hold them to that, point mark was the Philadelphia Eagles halfway through the year. Nobody else was able to hold the Bengals under 20 points, really. And the Steelers did. If you had told me the Steelers were going to hold the Bengals to 19 points somehow with how they were playing, I would have told you there's no way the Steelers put up anything less than that against a Bengals team that all year we've been talking about being the reason why they stink. Everybody points to the fact that this defense is hurting Joe, is hurting this offense. If it wasn't for this defense playing so bad, the Bengals would be, one of the best teams in the AFC. Everything was pointed at this defense. So, for the offense that was so good coming into this game to score only 19 points, and for the Steelers' offense to have an opportunity here to at least get one win against the defense that was considered so bad, and to put up less than 19 points is just like the worst case scenario. Again, I keep using it, the icing on the cake for this last 4 to 5 game stretch for the Steelers, where it was such a litmus test to kind of see where they were, to be considered real contenders. You already beat the Ravens, right, going into this game, but you had games against the Eagles, which you kind of had an opportunity in, against not the Chiefs, but against the who was it? I can't even remember now. The Ravens was one game. You were playing them again in Baltimore. You even had an opportunity to win that game and potentially sweep them. Against the Eagles, like I mentioned, and even the Bengals, right, in a must-win scenario. You had an opportunity to win almost all of those games, dare I say, because even though the Eagles game, the final score might not reflect it, there was a point in that game when it was 20-13, and the Steelers had the ball, and they were driving, and it looked like they had some sort of momentum, but there was that fumble by Najee Harris, and that really killed off the game from that point on. Then, the following week against the Ravens, it was 17-24 after Lamar Jackson had just thrown an interception, and you find yourself now with this second life in that game where you're only down 7 points somehow without George Pickens, and you have an opportunity to at least tie the game, and then you throw that pick six, and then that game is already done with, right? You're going to lose that game. And even last night where the offense, or not last night, but last Saturday, where the offense throughout the entire game was so bad, right? It was so bad that I don't know how they even scored that one touchdown to Pat Freiermuth, but they barely even scored that. And to still have an opportunity to go win that game was all, again, thrown out the window with an awful 2-minute drive where just bad decisions from Russ, just wasting a lot of time, unnecessary time, and the play calling was also another problem that was just reflected on Saturday's game as well. And that the worst part of all three of those games was that it legitimately made me think that, at one point in all those games, I thought the Steelers could maybe win this game and pull one out of nowhere. But like they did in all three of them, they crashed and burned and disappointed me in each one of those games. So now heading into these playoffs, right, you look around everywhere else at all the teams, right? You want to talk about all the teams and not just the AFC, but also the NFC. We're not going to compare them to any of the division winners because, they're obviously not to that level. But then you look at the wild card teams, right? You look at the Chargers. They're playing at a whole different level now. It looks like everything's clicking for them. They've won their last 3 games going into the playoffs, so they're obviously playing better than the Steelers. The Broncos just had a huge win at home, blowing out the Chiefs and making the playoffs for the first time in 10 years. Then you go over to the other side. I mean, the Steelers don't compare to the Vikings. The Commanders, have a rookie sensation at quarterback. They're feeling great about this first season with their rookie quarterback. So the Steelers, again, the way they're playing right now don't really compare to the Commanders either. And then you look at the Packers where, they could have had an opportunity to be the 6th seed, but even still, the way that their offense operates with Jordan Love and Matt LaFleur calling the plays, still, with what I saw from the Steelers, I don't even think it comes close to that. And the team that I think would even be close to how bad the Steelers are playing would be the Houston Texans. And, they've won the division already. And, they're just in a better spot, in a more favorable position to move on in these playoffs than the Steelers. So, are the Steelers the worst team in this playoffs? It's hard to argue against that. As much as I don't like saying it, it just feels like it is. Now with this challenge ahead of you, going into Baltimore again and the way they're playing, they just pretty much shut out the Texans and they just destroyed the Cleveland Browns too. It's hard to imagine any sort of scenario where the Steelers can at least compete on that offensive side of the ball. And then defensively, last time there was a lot of miscommunications and, just mental errors on that point. They kind of cleaned it up against the Bengals, but it's just hard to say right now where the Steelers team can go. And in terms of them being one and done this year, it's looking like it. If say we're betting on it, and we're taking the odds on them being one and done and winning this game, we're talking about plus 600, 700 for them to win this game, and then kind of minus 200 for them to go home after the first round, right? It's that bad, I think, because, we're not going to get into it now, but the play calling hasn't been great. The offensive line hasn't looked any better at all really this year. There's been moments where it looked all right, but over the last couple weeks, Russell Wilson's been sacked too much. He's not going to break out any real long runs consistently. And, like I mentioned, the play calling isn't great. I know what the Steelers are running on 1st and 2nd down. I know it's going to go run, probably another run, and then on 3rd down, it's 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, or maybe 3rd and 11 because you lost yards already, and then you try to pass, it goes incomplete because you don't really target the middle of the field. And then it's that same sequence for almost all the entirety of the game. And it doesn't help that George Pickens is really your only target. And the way that he played last week, there's really no other guy to go to. Honestly, in terms of wide receivers, you could go to Pat Freiermuth, but he's not about to go take over a game they've just never seen that from him. So there's a lot of problems with this offense, right? If it's not clicking with George, then they almost have no answers, right? Because the running game's been hit or miss, really, but it's not really been so consistent for them to rely on it thus far. So it looks like, coming up until this game on Saturday against the Baltimore Ravens, despite their injuries, it looks like the Steelers are heading towards a one-and-done season again. And what that means for them going into the offseason, it's crazy. We're already talking about the offseason with them. But, that's how it looks like right now, right? There's no real legitimate kind of argument to make in their favor other than the fact that it's a division game, right? And all those sort of things said about that. But I don't know. It's hard to believe it as of right now. But I would like to know what you guys think about that. Are you more optimistic about the Steelers than I am, or are you even more down on them than I am? So leave your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. But With that being said, and that rant already over, we have come to the end of today's show. I want to thank you guys for joining me for today's episode, and a reminder to you guys to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. Check out the Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel on YouTube, where you can find more of the Chip Shot Football Podcast on there and more of these live shows, more breaking news, more coverage around the NFL, and breakdowns, previews, and all that sort of stuff around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys again for joining me. Make sure to come back tomorrow at the same time, where we're going to start discussing the wild card weekend coming up this upcoming weekend. So I'll see you guys hopefully back here again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.